So, Brad, it's the early 1960s. It's the Cold War, Soviet Union and the United States. And the CIA gets a brilliant idea, all right?
Oh, yeah.
They come up with this idea that they call Operation Acoustic Kitty. Have you heard of this, my friend? Operation Acoustic Kitty?
No.
Okay.
It's got to be great, though, with a name like that.
Here was the chef's kiss brain trust here. The CIA rigged up a living cat with cameras and a microphone built into, surgically implanted into the cat. And they were going to basically release it into a Soviet compound, either an embassy or somewhere in Moscow. And the cat cost, in 1960s money, about $20 million to modify, right? $20 million. Wow. They get it working. They rig it up. The system is the electrical system is working within the biological system. They've got, in the early 60s, by the way, they've got all this miniaturized equipment. They get it in the cat. They're like, all right, we're going to test it out. We'll release it into the DC area and see how it does. We'll just see what it records walking around the DC area. Yeah. They release the cat. It immediately gets hit by a taxi and killed. $20 million cat. Operation Acoustic Kitty, not such a success for the CIA, Brad.
Oh my God. That's like those videos that you see on social media where they save like a groundhog and they let it go and it gets about 10 feet before an eagle swoops down and takes it away. That's amazing.
Also, I just love that the CIA at the height of the Cold War could basically come up with the most cuckoo bananas idea, and someone would have the access to one of those black projects budgets and be like, here you go, here's $20 million, let's wire up the cat, that's fine.
Here's a blank check, add as many zeros as you need.
Yeah, also, how do you decide where that microphone goes, Brad? What part of the cat?
Yeah, I get that the camera goes on the head. Where do you put the microphone?
Well, because also, think about it, miniaturization in the 1960s, not that great. They didn't necessarily have the tech we have now. So, you would have had a normal-sized cat, and they'd be like, hey, Dimitri, have a look at cat. Why does cat have 18-inch long wiener? What is wrong with cat?
I notice your cat always walks up and shows me his butt. I wonder where we can put that microphone.
They designed a $20 million cat that dies of an impacted bowel. That's
Yeah, the good news is we got video. The bad news, the only audio we've got is the kitty litter box.
We've got audio. What about visuals? You don't want to see the visuals.
You've heard of grainy videos. Well, when do you see this litter box?
Oh my gosh. And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about the height of Cold War espionage and making comics.
And the height of Cold War espionage and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And just a reminder that this show is going out live right now to our VRP members and pals over at patreon.com/comiclab. You can join us at the $10 level for the ComicLab Live Gab. Yeah. And those shows are also archived, so you can watch the live performance at any given time.
Absolutely. And the show is also being brought to you by Wacom, the makers of the Wacom One. You can check that out over at wacom.com. And Dave and I, both big fans of the portable, professional, powerful Wacom One. We use them in our own studios and when we're away from the studio.
That's right. It has become a much-loved member of the studio, both here in Los Angeles and in Brad's studio in Philadelphia. Yeah. And so we give a huge shout-out and a thanks to our friends at Wacom at wacom.com and the Wacom One. And Bradley J., our first topic for today, we are having passed October. Both you and I were chatting this morning about drawing challenges.
Yeah.
And they come in various forms in the art world. There is, obviously, having just finished Inktober, there is Inktober, and then there's 19 different versions of Inktober. Right. There's 24-hour Comics Day. There's hourly Comics Day. There's everybody draw a carrot that looks like a rat day. I don't know. You can name 1,000 more days. You get the idea, though. There's a bunch of drawing challenges.
Yeah.
And I was curious because I don't know that I have ever seen Brad Geiger do a drawing challenge. Have you ever done a drawing challenge?
Yeah, every freaking day of my life. It's called being a cartoonist.
Oh my God, immediately salty, right out of the gate. Right out of the gate. He's not, God bless. Bring it down a notch. You immediately throw acid on the show. I'll tell you what, I've been a cartoonist. Every GD day I've been a cartoonist. That's my drawing challenge. Okay. Okay, Brad, hold on. I want you to take a breath. I'm going to throw this question at you again. Hey, Brad, have you ever done one of these drawing challenges?
No, you know what? I don't think it's quite for me.
Oh my God! That was such.
That even tasted bad in my mouth to say.
That was the parent-teacher conference version of Brad. Okay, we will absolutely talk with him about that. Yes, thank you for that input.
Yeah, and you're doing a great job. Listen, so I'm not a huge fan of drawing challenges in general. And I'll tell you why. Part of it, and this is kind of the most important part, is this. A lot of these drawing challenges are like, do a certain number of drawings within a certain number of days. Right. Or for 24-hour comics day, it's do and this one really gets under my skin, do a page every hour for 24 hours. Number one, it sets up this unrealistic idea of what it means to be a cartoonist or a comics artist. You don't work that way. I don't work that way. It's a horrible way to work. Somebody has, I've talked about this on webcomics.com, going all the way back to 2011. And a couple people have sent to me some 24-hour comics day comics that were quite good from start to finish. But I'm going to say I think those are the outliers. Most often, if you've ever read a comic done on 24-hour comics day, the first page, beautiful, fantastic page. Second page, pretty good. Third page, starting to slip a little bit. By the 10th page, it's this hastily sketched out stuff. There's nothing makes sense anymore. If you get as far as 24 hours and 24 pages, that last page is literally just a couple of slashes and a word, and it's probably a 4-letter word at that point. There's just a real steep decline, and here's the problem with that. Not only does it set up an unrealistic expectation of what professional comics is, but a lot of these things that it's you draw every day, inevitably people fall off, right? They can't complete the challenge. They can't stick with it. Something else comes up, as also all too often happens in real life. And then what you have is a person who feels bad because they participated in this thing that everybody else seems to be doing just fine, right? Because we're watching everybody else's highlight reel. Everybody else is doing great, but me, I couldn't complete it, says this person. And then they feel horrible because they couldn't complete it. That's my problem with drawing challenges. They put the emphasis on quantity and not where I think it should be, and that's on quality.
Well, I'll say my sense of your critique of these drawing challenges is I think what the disconnect between Brad Geiger and the drawing challenges is that what the drawing challenges do is they offer you the idea that drawing can be fun. And for Brad Geiger, I think fun doesn't enter the... I'll tell you what's fun, producing a quality comic. Get to work. I have a soft spot in my heart, even though I don't do them. I have done 24-hour comics day. I think that's of all the challenges, that's the only one I've done. I've done that twice, I think.
Did you make it all the way through to the 24th hour?
Well, what I did was, I remember because it was 2 houses ago, I invited 6 cartoonists over. We went back to my sort of makeshift, because at that time at the house, I had a makeshift studio. Yeah. We put a bunch of tables out, like folding tables, and 6 cartoonists did 24-hour comics day together. Yeah. And for me, that was mainly about fellowship. It was laughter. It was like bouncing ideas off each other. It was also sharing art tips. Yeah. And my stated goal at the beginning of 24-hour comics day was, I'm not producing 24 comics. That's stupid. I'm just going to use 24 hours to make as many my level quality comics as I could. And I think I made 10 maybe 9 comics, not like an extraordinary amount, but way more than I normally would in a day. Like when would I normally do 9 Sheldons, or 10 Sheldons, that kind of thing. So for me,
that's my point exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, so my idea in terms of your critique of like you lose professional quality, I take that point. That's fair. But I think you can modify some of these with, and then for me, hourly comics, I think is purely fun, reflectionary, like dashed off drawings. I don't see those. No one I've ever seen that does that puts a ton of effort into them. They always do a passing amount, a joy-filled amount, like the kind of like back of envelope sketches on while you're on the phone kind of level of quality,
Yeah.
And so I think I've seen Magnolia Porter do it lovely. I've seen Lucy Bellwood do it lovely. I've never done it, but I think I would like to do the hourly comics day one time. But here's my overarching theory, right? Is that for a lot of people, these drawing challenges serve a very real and very necessary purpose, which is they know they want to draw, right? They know that drawing brings them joy, but for whatever reason of timing in their life, right now, they don't have a project to apply it to.
Right.
So here comes this artifice, this structure that says, hey, we're going to provide the ideas. All you got to do is draw, right? Like for Inktober, we'll provide the prompts. For 24-hour comics day, all you got to do is just sit and draw for 24 hours. For hourly comics days, all you got to do is capture what happened in the last hour in your life, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, that's just what they want. They just want to get drawing again. And so it's structure that, so I'm a little less critical of it than you. But are you genuinely seeing them as a net negative to the drawing world?
I think not a net negative. I think there's a danger there in because I think very, very often there's a sense of failure that gets attached to these drawing challenges that I think can be detrimental. And of course, like I said, it's also very unrealistic to do 24 pages in 24 days. But I get worried because if you follow a lot of these hashtags around October, you see a lot of people saying, well, I dropped off on 13 days again. I didn't make it to even to day 20. There's a lot of like feelings of failure that get wrapped up into that. And again, what I don't hear is I only did 13 drawings, but they were great drawings. The quality never gets talked about. The fact that they didn't get to number 14 is what sticks in their mind. And when I see this, I'm like, oh, come on, you're missing the point of what drawing is all about. It's not about getting to 31. It's about having fun, like Dave says, if this is, and having a prompt, if that's what you need, and doing good work. But I guess the part that I get a little bit uncomfortable with is those feelings of failure that people express online.
Well, okay. I share your concern that it could potentially be a prompt of failure in the sense of like you're setting yourself up to be mad at yourself. But yeah, I don't know that is the challenge's fault or the prompt's fault. You know what I mean? Like,
fair point.
There's 1,000 ways someone can feel like a failure in their art, all on their own, without a prompt being involved. Yeah. And so, I don't know that it's like if you're seeing glass half empty. If you've done 15 days of Inktober, by the way, and you got 15 really cool drawings and 15 days where life got in the way. If you're seeing that as glass half empty, that's not on Inktober. That's on you. You know what I mean? Like you did 15 cool drawings. How great. You didn't do them at the beginning of October. Now you have 15. How awesome for you. You're a good person and should feel good about yourself. That's what I'm saying. But like, I don't know that that's Scott McCloud's fault for coming up with 24-hour comics. And I don't know that it's no one's fault for coming up with the prompt. It was basically an excuse to, in a non-creative moment, find an excuse for creativity. And if it didn't spark on all 30 days or all 24 hours, that's okay, I think. I guess what I'm saying is I'm trying to see it as a glass half full, rather than like, don't come out of it feeling like Ziggy. You know what I mean? Because Brad, you remember Ziggy at the end of his 20. You remember the best Ziggy punchline that you ever liked, Brad. What was that Ziggy punchline you remember?
Ziggy got to the end of 24 Hours Comics Day, as you remember. And
yes, I remember.
I've been drawing so long, I can't even feel my pencil in my hands. That's what he said. And I thought that was a weird way for him to go with that. But
I remember this the joke that Ziggy had the following year, where he said at the end of his drawing challenge, he goes, "The only prompt that I feel is a prompt to failure. I'm Ziggy."
Well, let's talk about prompts too, because and I'm going to try not to be salty about this. Although I am going to be honest, another reason that I've always been a little bit like I had a hard time getting my head around these is because I've never needed an external prompt to tell me that I should draw or that it's okay to draw or here's something you should draw. I've always been somebody who always wanted to draw. I've always, I mean, despite what you may think, I've always found a great joy in drawing. I don't.
I was only making a passing joke. I know you find a great joy in drawing.
I know you are. No, but to a deeper extent, I've always had an internal motivation to draw. And part of it is I've never understood anyone who needed an external motivation to draw. And I'm going to hasten to put this next part in there. I'm not saying that's bad. And like Dave said, this is a good reason to say, hey, it's okay to draw, or here's an encouragement to draw. What I'm going to add to that is that's a good place to start. I just don't want to see you end there. At some point, that motivation has to become internal. If, and by the way, it's okay if this never happens, but if you've got the idea in your head that you want to do this for a career, at some point, you've got to shift from an external motivation to an internal motivation, because the idea of building a career on this, at some point, the prompts are going to run out, the 24 hours are going to be up. At some point, that motivation has to come from inside.
You're 1,000% right. You're absolutely right. That's why I see a lot of these people, and why I specifically said a lot of people take these prompts when they are between projects or when a project is not currently happening, because they know they want to draw. They just happen to have wrapped up a book, or then now they've got 2 months until their next project starts, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But yes, you're right in that we very often on this show get really sweet questions that basically sum up as this: hey guys, how do I find the motivation to start? Yeah. And some of those are the hardest for Brad and I to answer, because that's so fundamental to the process that it's almost hard to describe how one finds the motivation when there is none. You know, you had said something early this morning to that point, and I forgot what it was. What was it that you had said?
Well, a lot of people think that you need motivation to start, and what I find really often is that you need to start to get motivated. They're actually putting it exactly opposite, that they say, well, when I get motivated, I'm going to do this thing. And in my experience, what happens is I start doing the thing and then the motivation comes, right? Because I start to get excited about it, or I start to see some possibilities. But if I were to wait around for motivation, if I relied on motivation for productivity, I would be in a very bad position right now. I wouldn't be able to build a career. I wouldn't be able to build a business, because a lot of being a professional means doing it when you're not motivated. And sometimes finding the motivation or creating the motivation. But if I waited for motivation, I'd be sunk.
Well, and part of my response to you on that is, I think that's what the prompts in part are doing, is they're just getting the wheels greased. They're just getting the motion started, like physically draw, just sit down and physically draw, and the wheels of creativity will start. Like it's like, have you ever had an old rusty nut on a bolt and you WD-40 it, and Brad's eyes, as soon as I say the word nut, Brad lights up like a Christmas tree. Brad, I'm talking about a tool that you have in the garage, a nut and a bolt, Brad. For God's sakes, bring it down a notch.
I'm sorry. There's always going to be that 13-year-old sensibility inside. As soon as you said that, I'm like, where's he going with that?
God, it's getting so that someone can't even say loosen a nut without Brad finding 19 jokes to say. So Brad, as you're trying to
tell me more about it. You were telling me about the part where you're going to start using the lube. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh God! You found the better joke. So no, I'm just saying, like, sometimes these prompts are like the WD-40 of life. You know what I mean? They just get you moving, because we've all been there where, for example, Brad Geiger 2 months ago was in a total writing blasé moment. You know, you couldn't get anything out. And so imagine, because we've all been there, if someone's been hit by a couple big life events, but they're trying to pull themselves out of it, they know they want to draw. Sometimes I think these prompts can be a salvationary moment of like, thank God, at least it's something getting me drawing again, you know?
Absolutely. And that's why I said it's a great place to start. It's just not a good place to finish. At some point, once you get started, you've got to convert over into internal motivation.
Yeah, no, I think we're on the same page, is that your hesitation is what is the result of this, both in terms of like feeling depressed by not finishing it perfectly, or not internalizing the energy to get started for other projects, right? And so for that, I will 1000% grant you that Brad is right, that the big takeaway from a prompt-based comics game, and that's what these are, they're games. These prompt-based comics game is to internalize that sense of starting, right? Like, I will start now on my own. And it's also to internalize a sense of optimism. Hey, look at me. Out of 31 days, I did 7 days of comics. That's great. I should feel proud of myself. I should keep going. So I will defer to you on that point. I think you're right that the big, as long as the big takeaway is a net positive, then these challenges work. If it's a net negative, then that's something that should be concerning. I do agree with you on that.
And I've been doing this show for long enough to know that when we get to the point where Dave says Brad is right, it's time to close the topic and move to the next one. And quit while I'm ahead. I'm not going to say anything.
Quick, before he says handling nuts again. Quick.
Yes. And besides, I've got another question, and this has come up a couple of different times in a couple of different places. And I'm curious, and it's specifically about you. It's something that I want to hear your answer to, and it's this. Comes in from Jeff Langcon, who says, in episode 200, to illustrate how execution of an idea is more important than the idea itself, Dave noted how a project very similar to his idea for Kaiju and Cowboys had appeared as another creator's Kickstarter. This demonstrated very well how different people can come up independently with the same idea. However, I was wondering how you might proceed if Kaiju and Cowboys was more than just a casual idea. What if this was a serious project in which you had already invested time and effort? How would you go forward finding out that somebody else was kickstarting a very similar project? Would you change some things to prevent charges of plagiarism? I also wonder how closely you would look at the other project. Would you examine it to see what the similarity and differences are? Or would you avoid it to prevent those ideas from getting into your head? Dave Kellett, I ask you, if this was something that you were kind of noodling around with, that wasn't something that you had invested time, but in a hypothetical situation, if you had invested a whole lot of time into Kaiju and Cowboys and then found out that there was this other thing, what next? How do you deal with that?
Well, had this been a near and dear project and not some side tertiary project for me, what I probably would have done is I would have just changed the title. That's what I would have done. Because really, the title was, in this specific case, the title was the major crossover. And unfortunately for me, in this very specific case, because, and it's worth clarifying, for me, 90% of my joy and excitement for this project was the title itself, which is not always the best way to go. So when the title was basically taken, I kind of lost my mojo for making this project. But that, again, that's very specific to this project. But I'm glad to have this point of clarification, because this is something we talk about a lot, that ideas aren't special. It's the execution of ideas that are special, right? So whatever I would have done, and I have a clear idea in my mind of what it would have ended up looking like and sounding like and being, it would have been very different in execution from this other idea that was somewhat similar. The titles were very similar. The ideas were somewhat passingly similar, but my execution would have been markedly different, right? It would have been how the movie 10 Things I Hate About You was the exact concept of Taming of the Shrew, Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew, just completely different execution, right? Literally the exact same idea. totally different execution. That's what we get at when we say that the execution is what matters. So what I would have done is I probably would have read the other comic, not because I would have been afraid to steal ideas, but because I would have been afraid to accidentally cross over in any way, shape, or form. The IP attorneys, when I used to work at Mattel, they always used to say that you need to have at least 30% market differentiation between two ideas for there to be legally separated. And I would always say, well, what the hell is 30%? How do you quantify 30%? And then the IP attorneys would say, that's why lawyers exist, because they can argue in court this or that, that kind of thing. And so, and you see that with song litigation all the time about like what is legally differentiated from another song enough such that it can stand on its own and not be an infringement. But where was I going to say? Oh, so anyway, so with this one, I'm glad you asked this question because I would have read the other one, mainly to see what small details I could throw out of my story because they were passingly similar or seemingly similar, and I would have just done anything that was my own idea and focused on my execution as being very different. I think that's how I would have handled it. Had this been a near and dear project, Brad, how would you have handled something like this?
Very much the same answer. I would have, number one, your first step, especially since the titles were so similar, you don't want to intentionally kind of stomp on somebody else's ground. You don't want to infringe upon their trademark intentionally. Now, sometimes you find out that you've infringed on it unintentionally or the reverse has happened, and then you take the necessary steps to address that. But you certainly don't want to intentionally do it. So changing the title, that's the first thing that you do. And then if you either find a way to make sure that you're not treading the same conceptual ground, you're not kind of getting in the way of those ideas and those executions, that you're doing something that's different enough that you're not going to cause problems with another creator. And if in a case like Kaiju and Cowboys, my go-to for something like that is, what is it about this that really fascinates me? What, in other words, I would start to go the other direction. Instead of going towards from idea to execution, I would go backwards and go from idea to conceptualization. And then I would say conceptualizing. I would go from idea to concept.
I would go from breakfast rum to brunch rum, and then I'd have a little snifter of lunch rum. What was the word that was thrown out there? At first it was like conceptualization. I really think you switched to Portuguese for one brief glimpse there when you tried to say the word conceptualization.
And I really think that I really thought that I slid it past you. I swear to God, I thought I was doing so well.
Oh my God! Let's just leave it at this point. It's a Porky Pig joke at this point. Let's just go to a different one.
Concept.
There we go.
I would go from idea to concept, and I'd say, what is it about this that initially fascinated me? Is it the anachronism? And can I, for example, in fact, I almost pitched this to you. What if we just changed the kaiju into dinosaurs? Or what if the kaiju were some other anachronistic figure? I would even say like samurais, right? Or what is it about this culture clash that fascinates you? And I would try to find something there that I can go off and gallop away on. But it's certainly something you don't want to purposefully and consciously tread on somebody else's trademark. And there's lots of ways that you can get around that. And in one case, it might just be by going back to concepts and then finding out what it was that excited you about that in the first place.
Yeah, for me, one of the I guess the two core things that excited me were I loved the title. I really loved the title. So that was the bummer. That's what killed the mood for me, was that losing that title. Yeah. But I also love the idea of having to take down a kaiju, the size of a kaiju on like Pacific Rim, but with 1868 weapons. So like, what do you do? Do you load up a train with dynamite and launch it off a cliff at the thing? And so for me, that was the fun idea, was like, you would get Nobel involved. You would get Edison, you would get Tesla involved. They would try to create energy weapons. You would get Remington, you would get all the machine gun the famous, Wild West manufacturers of guns to try to come up with new guns. It would be a fun, like an alternate history, basically. So
Yeah.
that was my core idea. And what was interesting is that execution was already so different from the one that got kickstarted. Because I think, Brad, we looked at it briefly. It was like robots in space, and it would have been a very different execution. Mine was an alternate history Earth, where you would have all these different people coming together to fight kaijus with weapons that, frankly, couldn't even come close to what we have today. That, for me, was the fun of it. And so I would have found a way around it in terms of with a different title and just being very conscious not to have, especially in my marketing or descriptions or anything like that, anything that would go to or be seen to be stepping on the toes of the other project.
Yeah.
And then I am not a lawyer, so I will say this right away. I am not a lawyer, but if there's ever a situation where you're like this, just make sure that you keep and retain all your records of creativity as you work on a project like this, where you're even slightly concerned that it might be seen as being perceived or could be taken in a legal sense of, because so much of that in a court case, again, I'm not a lawyer, don't take my legal advice. I'm just saying always retain your creative work on how you developed a project, because that will come to play if someone does end up suing you in a case like this. So anyway, I think that's a fun question. And listen, might I end up loving this project so much that someday a title will come to me that clicks with the same sort of magic that Kaiju and Cowboys did? Yeah, yes, that's absolutely possible. I still like the idea. I like the idea of alternate history stories. I think those are fun, and so I may yet go back to it. But yes, it's absolutely doable in a case like this, and I think it is totally workable.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
So, Brad, a quick update for everyone who is listening at home. I know everyone was dying to know this.
Yeah.
Patrick Stewart, in the first season of Star Trek: The Next Generation, Brad.
Yeah.
Do you know how old Patrick Stewart was?
First generation of, or the
first season of the first season of The Next Generation.
I had to be about 63.
He was 47 years old
Wow.
in season 1 of Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Wow.
Patrick Stewart, no matter what age, always kind of looking 62. That's the thing with Patrick Stewart. But that is weird to think that he was 47 in the first season of Star Trek: The Next Generation. I don't know why. It just didn't seem like that's the right age for what that was.
Yeah. Well, have you ever met somebody like that? I knew a guy like that in college, he had already gone to male pattern baldness. He just had the hair around the back of his head. The top was completely clear. And he looked like a 45-year-old guy walking through college campus, but he was 20-something. I mean, there are some people that just immediately advance to that visual of an older person.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick Stewart kind of always was the eternal, wise, older-looking dude. I don't know why that struck me, though, that he was 47. That just seems like something's incongruous there about him being 47. Anyway, so that important update for the whole show. Glad I brought that up. Really important for everybody here in terms of making comics and making a living from comics. All right, so Brad, the next topic I wanted to bring up was actually a quote from, of all people, Steve Jobs, and I wanted to bring this to you for your thoughts. So Steve Jobs was talking about tastemakers, and he said, "It's really hard to design products by focus groups. A lot of times people don't know what they want until you show it to them."
Oh, yeah.
And I thought in terms of making comics, there's a really strong parallel there. Yeah. Not in terms of our marketing or our products, but the comic itself. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, I hear that quote being bandied about from time to time. You know, people don't know what they want until we show it to them. And I think it's possible in some cases to take that and apply it in a way that might be detrimental, right? Because there's a certain type of person that's going to hear that and say, that's right. These people don't know they want my genius until they see my genius, and then they'll know my genius, and then they'll see what's going on, right? And that's not really what that quote is all about. The real meaning, the real takeaway from that quote is the underside of it. When you flip that over, where it actually means this. Readers will tell you, well, I want this, or I want that, or I think things should be this way, or I think things should be another way. And you might have, as an artist, different ideas on what that is. If you let that reader feedback, if you let that focus group mentality tell you how your creativity should be, in other words, if you do a comic that's aimed at a demographic, or a comic that you think, I'm going to do this because I think it's going to be popular because this certain idea is popular. And by the way, back in the newspaper comics days, we saw this all the time. Demographic comics, right?
Yeah.
If you try to do that, you're gonna have bad results in a lot of cases. Instead, what that says is, don't listen to what readers tell you they want. Don't try to read the tea leaves or to look at the demographics. Look into what you want and put that out there with all the gusto that you can. Do that comic that you want to see in the world. And then all of a sudden, readers will be like, oh, yeah, I didn't realize it, but that's what I've always wanted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people focus on this as though Jobs were putting the focus on the creator as God. You know what I mean? The creator as omnipotent, the creator as you'll get what I give you and you'll like it kind of thing. Whereas I think it's more the fickleness of the new with an audience that he was focusing on. So, for example, the worldwide massive hit of Squid Game, right?
Yeah.
From every traditional metric of how you would structure the first act of a story in Hollywood standards, that show, if you watch it again, significantly longer in the setup. But it's so important for the arc of that show that setup is really grounded in that this character has reached a point of desperation through both external and internal reasons, right? And yet, so I guess what I'm saying is focus groups would tell you, oh, that setup is too long. Oh, I don't like this. Oh, I don't like that. But the creators knew that that's what was needed for that show, right? Yeah. And in so doing, they created one of the biggest worldwide hits that's produced hundreds of millions of dollars of value for Netflix. And is frankly brilliant. I think that show's brilliant. But what I'm getting at there, though, is that had you focus group that, because it's funny that we should actually be talking about focus groups, because my wife's show is currently in focus group testing right now.
Oh, really? And
from an outsider looking in, Brad, I have to tell you the process is maddening. It's maddening. It's maddening. That's someone who self-admittedly in their own focus group testing is like, I don't, in the case of this show, I don't like romantic comedies. But then you have to take the notes of the person that doesn't like romantic comedies. Like, and the network executives are pointing to that as though that's how you should guide your show. It's like, that's not someone who's going to watch this show. Why, you know, if, for example, that would be like you, who write romance really well, taking romance notes from me, who doesn't write or read romance. Like, why would you take a note from me? You wouldn't. Yet in a focus group setting, the showrunners and the network executives have to take, and it's the weirdest thing. I do not understand it. In the sense of modern television production, it's all about covering your ass, frankly. Yeah. It's all about having something you can point to if the show fails, to go like, well, we followed the focus grouping, and who could have guessed, Brad, that the braver thing is to say, no, I'm sticking with the show as is. I think it's great. I think it's, you know, let the auteur voice speak through. But because there's so much money involved, TV can't do that. It's really weird. And so you end up watering down a lot of really interesting voices in television through focus grouping. But anyway, keep going.
Well, I mean, I'm more fascinating in this. I mean, I want to go one more step on this. So what's the play there? Do you go and you do what the focus group wants until you, like the first season of this, you might make some changes that water it down, but let's say you can make that first season hold, and now you get a second season. Is that when you push back for what you originally had in mind for this series? In other words, once you've got a stronghold, then you push out, or are you beholden to that original focus group?
Well, It's funny. There's a kind of a joking saying in television that in season 1 you work for them, in season 2 they work for you.
Yeah.
Because once you've gotten to season 2, you basically have more power as a creator, and so you can be like, no, I'm not doing that. And then eventually you get to Al Jean's standpoint and be like, nope, fuck it. The Simpsons aren't taking any notes. Nope, we're not going to take any of these notes. I just without tipping the hand too much about what the process is for my wife, as a creator who works for themselves, for myself, by myself, I'm fascinated by the maddening process of having to listen to notes from someone who has never created before and just writes in like, I don't know that I like the truck. They should have been driving a car. Or I don't like trees. They should plant a bush instead. It's like, what are these notes that we're listening to?
Yeah, I don't know. Who watches TV like that? You know, I've never watched a TV show and thought, well, why are they showing trees there instead of bushes? Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
The problem, one of the problems I think is for television, especially, you're trying to get to a mass audience. But the advice that we always give is it's better to have someone passionately love it with a smaller group than to have a large group that passingly likes it, right? Yeah. But the thing is, TV network executives are all kind of shooting for passingly likes it too, because they can have bigger numbers to point to, you know? Right. Because they can't shake that advertising model, even though it's streaming now, you know, that kind of thing. Anyway, it's just a very different way of producing art. And this idea with Steve Jobs is that a lot of times people don't know what they want until you show them. It's interesting to me, the fear that goes into using focus groups to water down or neuter an auteur voice in mass media. And it's not the way that I would do it, which is not to say that like the old network way was perfect in terms of one network executive chomping on a cigar being like, I love it. No matter what the audiences say, we're going to go with it. You know, like NBC in the 80s. I don't remember what his name was, the network executive, but like he had like a string of hits.
Was it Brent Tartikoff?
Tartikoff. Yeah, I had a string of hits, right? And basically kind of followed his gut, you know? And in the same way, Randall Hearst did that in the 20s and 30s with comic strips. He's like, I don't care what people say about George Harriman. I like it. We're keeping Crazy Cat. Yeah. Crazy Cat tested terribly a lot of times in terms of audience reaction. But Randall Hearst liked Crazy Cat, so it stayed in the papers. And so I'm not saying that's necessarily a better way of like the dictatorial editor or the dictatorial network executive. But it's just interesting how focus groups so often don't help a creative process. It's watering down.
I mean, it goes back to that thing, to bring it back to comics just for a second. It goes back to that question we get asked from time to time. Would you ever like to see your feature or your title translated into a TV show or a movie? And Dave and I have always been kind of standoffish about that idea. I think I'd be more amenable than Dave would even. But I think that's kind of why, because we know the thing that we love about comics is that putting out that singular vision, right or wrong, it's our singular vision that we get to put out into the world. And as soon as you start talking about TV crews or movie writers and directors, now you've got somebody else's vision. And I'm a little bit less enthralled with that idea.
Yeah.
Because I know that at a certain point would probably annoy me a little bit. There'd have to be a lot of money involved to get me to look the other way on that.
Yeah, the piece that I've made with the idea that if in some future, and there's a passingly small chance it would ever happen, but if in the future I would be able to sell Drive to a streamer, I think there's two things that I do. One, I cash the check. Yeah. Two, I live with the hope they get close to my original voice, because I know that I have no power in that process. And I know from having watched my wife up close that it is it's like watching the sausage get made. It's unpleasant in terms of how many different voices will chime in and change the work. And that as the original creator, you don't necessarily get a big voice in that process, you know? Or have you been watching it all, Brad? Because it relates to the discussion in comics of what happened to Why the Last Man over the last decade in terms of its television run. Or
no, I haven't followed that at all.
Why the Last Man, I thought, was a really inventive and creative and wonderful book, and I loved it when it came out. I remember it was the last book that I read before my children were born. And I'll tell you what I mean. I used to go and get a coffee at a Barnes & Noble. Actually, not even a Barnes & Noble, a Borders before it closed down, before they shut down Borders.
You are
and
old.
I remember, this is like, for anyone thinking about having kids, I remember sitting there reading Y the Last Man, drinking a coffee, and thinking, I'll never be able to sit in a bookstore again once I become a parent. Do you remember that idea? You were so afraid that you basically lost all free time. And of course, that's a myth.
I mean, now you're talking about a wheelhouse topic for me, but that's probably because every older man in your life was force feeding you that. When you got kids, your life is over. I hated when people did that to me.
I know people, yeah.
And it's so not true. We need
You're
to
right. It's always old dudes
that
that did give that advice. Anyway, yes. Yeah. So I remember sitting in a Borders, drinking a coffee, reading Y the Last Man, thinking, well, I guess I'll never be able to do this again.
Yeah.
But at the time, I remember thinking, Y the Last Man would make such an interesting long-form story on film. I hope someday this team, and they're both amazingly creative, are able to bring it to the show. Well, what is it now? 13 years later, 14 years later, it finally got on television after, you don't need to hear the story, but a circuitously long time in terms of development. And it got canceled like 4 weeks into its run, 5 weeks into its run. Imagine waiting 14 years, Brad, to see your baby get brought to the screen. 14 years.
Yeah.
14 years. And then it gets canceled 5 weeks in. Right.
Wow.
And so that's why I have made peace with the fact that in the passingly small chance that I sell Drive to a streamer, you just have to say it's a totally different project now and it's out of my hands.
Yeah.
Because I want to dissuade cartoonists from the notion that that's the goal, that you want to get your comics made into a film or made into a TV show.
Yeah.
Because it so rarely works.
Yeah.
It's far more common to have it never become to the screen or have something like Y the Last Man happen than have The Walking Dead happen, right? That's the vanishingly rare thing is The Walking Dead.
Well, listen, Dave, as we're moving forward, I've got kind of a topic that came up that I wanted to talk to you about.
Okay.
So picture this. I'm sitting out on my front porch on a nice, beautiful autumn Saturday morning, drinking my coffee, and just idly scrolling through Twitter and all the different social medias. And I see somebody post that they had posted a comics page that they really liked. And they were saying something about how much they really loved this particular page. And somebody else commented, I bet Brad Geiger hates that page. And they added me. So it was like,
yikes. All right.
And it's like, you remember on the playground where that kid comes up to you and says, hey, let's you and him have a fight. And I'm sitting there looking at this, drinking my coffee, saying, what, how am I getting brought into this? You know, not only is this something that I personally don't like, which is somebody else expressing their joy on social media, and then another person's got to come in and take a dump on it. That's bad enough. But then you're using me to take a dump on it. It's like, and I realized that there's something called the podcaster's curse.
And what's that?
The podcaster's curse is that the people who feel the most emboldened to speak on your behalf are the people who understand what you're talking about the least. Because not only was I upset that I was being brought in to rain on this person's parade, but I think that page was masterful. I think the page was delightful. I think the page was great. And because there seems to be a breakdown, I wanted to take a second and explain why that is, in case there's anybody else who wants to speak on my behalf. Maybe you can understand what I'm talking about a little bit better.
Well, I gotta chime in for a second because I want to hear more details on this. But first, I gotta say, we had a show about 3 or 4 weeks ago where we talked about being defended by your readers. And do you remember how I said, no, I don't want anybody to defend me because of this very thing, is that people think that they're speaking in the way that I would have said it, in the defense that I would have made, in the points that I would have made. And I'm always like, shh, everybody be real quiet. Shh. No. Sit down. Shh. Let me speak for myself. No, Dave Kellett wouldn't want this because Dave Kellett hates puppies. No, shut up. I love puppies. What are you talking about? Why are you speaking for me? Don't defend me.
And there's also, it's like, if you want to share your thoughts, that's great. And then take the lumps on sharing your thoughts or take the praise for sharing your thoughts. But don't come in and share my thoughts. If I want to share my thoughts, I'll share them. But yeah, and as a matter of fact, I remember saying back on that topic where I was a little bit more comfortable with people speaking on my behalf, I want to change my answer. Don't speak on my behalf. Speak on your own behalf. Don't speak on my behalf.
Let me ask you specifics now. What was this page that they were like, oh, Brad Geiger would hate this?
Well, listen to this. So it was a Marvel Comics page. It was I think race cars or something, right? It was a page for Marvel Comics.
Race cars? Is that a title?
Race cars like Matchbox or something like that.
Okay, yeah. One of those licensed ones that they did in the 80s, 90s, yeah.
And it was done specifically in 1989, and that's important here. And it had a lot of diagonal gutters. It had a lot of panels that were non-rectangular, right?
Okay.
They were parallelograms. And because I've spoken in a certain context about these types of things, this person just zeroed in on diagonal gutters and parallelogram panels and said Brad would hate this. Well, here's the problem. I love it. And I'll tell you why. Because it was a comic that was made in 1989 specifically for a print production. In other words, the idea of a vertical scroll was decades in the offing, decades and decades before the vertical scroll. And the reason that I've told you to be a little bit careful and to maybe even avoid a diagonal gutter or a parallelogram kind of panel is because when you translate that into a vertical scroll, it's going to hamper or damage your ability for audience building and reader retention. And if you're using the web to try and build an audience, that's very important because right now, most of your readers are reading on a vertical scroll on their smartphone. That's just where we are right now. People like me and Dave have resisted. I know I resisted, dragged my feet on stopping thinking about my own website and my own digital publishing in terms of a vertical scroll because I'm like, people are still reading on their desktops. Well, no, it's official, and we've seen it walking up Broad Street for many, many years. Yeah. It's officially turned the tide. Your readers are reading on a vertical scroll on their smartphone, and if you make that decision to have diagonal gutters and parallelogram panels in a way that makes it harder for you to do a good vertical scroll, then on those days that you've made that decision, you're going to have a tougher time on reader retention and audience acquisition. And if you make that decision a lot of times over the course of that comic, it's going to have a cumulative effect that's going to dampen your ability to build readers, all of which have nothing to do to do with a print comic that's made in 1989. Those are two different things.
So I'm going to posit that in this case, someone, as you always said, missed the why behind the what.
Yeah.
Which is that your critique of say parallelograms or diagonals or weird gutters is not because of a dislike of that kind of uniquely shaped gutter. Yeah. It's because of it in the specific instances in a digital world that would not have existed for a page that you would have turned and viewed holistically and then dived into individual panels as you read in, which is a very different reading experience. And so you're saying, obviously, that you love a well-designed, aesthetically designed print page. There's absolutely nothing wrong with having that, but that in the very specific instance of designing for the web and for vertical scrolls, that's the reason to consider the why behind the what for diagonal panels.
And I think today's indie cartoonist has to consider both, right? And that's the struggle. We've got to come up with something that's going to be an attractive page for the print product and be something that can be easily translated into a vertical scroll. And that means making decisions. And it means something like there have been pages that I've done that did not translate well into a vertical scroll. And I know on those days that I did those pages, my reader retention wasn't great. And I knew if I did that decision enough, it was going to have a cumulative effect. Sometimes I make that decision because the print was more important to me on that day than reader retention. You see what I mean about making decisions? But I could see, like right now, I could see, let's take 1989 off the table. there are instances that I would still say that I'm all in favor of a page design that is not easily translated into a vertical scroll. For example, a project for Scholastic Books, right? Like, let's say I'm doing a young adult graphic novel. That is going to be marketed 100%. All the audience building, all the acquisition, all of the marketing, all the sales is going to happen in the print version. They're not going to be relying on the web to build audience and then do a Kickstarter and then have the book. That whole thing is going to be at a Scholastic book fair where the kid decides in the moment, holding the book in their hands, do I buy this or do I don't? Right. Now, in that case, if you want to really swing the bat on an amazing kind of print design that does not translate into a vertical scroll, you go for it, because in that case, you know where your product is headed. You can call your shot. Right. But it for many of us working independently, like me and Dave, you're going to be using the web for audience acquisition. And in those cases, you've got to make decisions and know what the ramifications of those decisions are.
Yeah, so really there's two swings and misses with this tweet coming at you. One is that someone spoke on your behalf, which is always uncomfortable. Yeah. And dragged you into a fight that didn't. This is a version of when someone says, I think Brad should promote this Kickstarter, and then ats you and ats the other creator. You're like, stop it. Don't do this.
Don't do that.
But when someone ats Brad and ats another creator and says they would have hated you, Brad would hate your work. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? What are you doing?
Please don't do that to me. And by the way, I'm very rare. I can't recall a time when I've actually gone out on social media and said, hey, I hate the thing you're doing. The worst thing I'll ever do to you is ignore you. You had it coming. You had it coming. That freaking duck, you know that duck gets under my skin. No, but please, just in general, please. I mean, not only to me, don't do that to anybody. Don't, if you want to say, hey, I've got these ideas, I've got these thoughts, that's fine. But don't do that to another person. And by the way, in general, if you see somebody expressing their joy and you don't think that it's very good, that's also a really good tweet to delete. Just say, again, what did I say? The worst thing I'll do is ignore you. That's if you don't have it goes back to those things that mom taught. If you don't got something nice to say, just don't say anything at all.
Right. And so I'm looking at you and just going silent.
I should be so lucky.
No, but let me say one other thing to you, because this is important for the listeners of ComicLab to hear too, is that Brad and I expound on advice about this or that too, and we do it with a fair amount of confidence because it works for us. So just remember, my reminder to everyone as we move on from this topic is absolutely at Brad on any negative comment you have about another comic or comic maker. We want to get Brad involved in any fights, all the drama we can. I think that would be lovely for all of us. And I like the idea of the podcaster's curse. That's an interesting. Why is it specifically a podcaster's curse and not a creator's curse?
Well, because I don't know. I don't know. I don't know that this happens as much in comics because it's not a case where somebody is applying thoughts that you're having to something else. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that somebody would have done this if I was just a cartoonist. Right. It's not like somebody was going to say, well, I don't think Brad thinks that's funny, or Brad wouldn't have written it that way, or Brad wouldn't have drawn it that way. But in a podcast where we're sharing ideas and thoughts and stuff like that, listen, conversely, now I have to be careful. Let me tell you a quick story. Every now and again, we'd have tense dinner conversations with one of our kids that maybe, and we'd say, hey, listen, you got to straighten up because this and that, those conversations you got.
Sure. But basic parenting is you're trying to nudge them in the right direction. Up. Yeah.
And the kid that we were talking to, it would go right in one ear and out the other. And it would smack the other brother right in the forehead. And what we noticed is the more we were shaking our finger at kid number one, kid number two was like it would like very much say, okay, I got to do this and I got to do that.
Oh, like over course correcting, thinking that it was directed to him.
For the brother. And then
Yeah.
we'd have to go to that one and we'd have to have a similar tense dinner conversation where we're saying, listen, you got to loosen up.
You're fine. You're okay. You got to bring it down a notch. Yeah.
So in the same way of the two brothers, we've got people, and by the way, I know them because I remember this stuff, that every time somebody says, hey, what's a good podcast to listen to? They go, hey, listen to ComicLab podcast. You got it, because these guys are great. That kind of stuff we love. Don't ever stop doing that. Because that's a positive thing. That's a happy thing. And we love when you tell people to listen to our podcast, because you know what I'm saying, Dave? We're going to hit these people.
We're going to over course correct for people being like, nope, I've never mentioned Comic Lab.
I shouldn't say Comic Lab because they say, hey, Brad said, keep my name out of your mouth. No. Whereas they don't speak on our behalf, but you can promote the show. That we don't want to stop. Because that's the feeling I'm getting of one of these tense dinner conversations.
Yeah.
And the wrong kid is going to listen.
I can see the tweets now though that it's like, hey gang, what's a fun comics focused podcast that I should try out? And someone's like, hey, if you want a real son of a bitch, you should listen to Brad Geiger on Comic Lab. He'll pick a fight with you any day of the week. He hates you 9 ways to Sunday, and he hasn't even met you yet.
Yeah, she said to meet you out in the playground at 5 o'clock and get your clock cleaned.
All right, well, Brad, let's wrap up the show with one, I think, a fairly tight and easy question that we can answer here. This question comes in from Dave Lerner over at patreon.com/ComicLab.
Yeah.
And Dave writes, please talk some more about character names. What makes a name good or not so good? How important is a good name for a major recurring character? How similar can the names of two characters be? Any advice for superhero or alien names? Should you try to have or try to avoid more diverse names? So Bradley, this is a whole question about the power, the impetus, and the importance of naming. Do you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know that there are a whole lot of wrong answers in a name. This comes down to the art of art. This comes down to the creativity of what you're doing. And I don't know that I can give. I
like the art of art, by the way. That's a good phrase. The art of art. I like that.
I'm really trying to assemble my thoughts on this on the fly because I don't know that I can tell you how to be creative. And this is a very creative choice. I don't know. I don't know that I can, because I can tell you how I approach a name through my creative process. I don't know that it's appropriate for you.
Right. So you're saying a version of like, if someone's asking you, hey, Brad, how should I want to kiss another human being? And you're like, I don't know how I know how to tell you that.
Actually, that's a really good metaphor. This is all about like a first date. And when I had a first date many, many years ago, what I wanted was for somebody to tell me exactly what to say so I could say those words so I would get smooched at the end of the date.
Oh, yeah. Because like when you're 15, 16, you don't know what to do. And you're like,
yes.
You're trying to figure it. Yes.
And you're saying, just tell me what to say.
And every adult in your life is saying, just be yourself, just be casual, just, I mean, yeah.
Yes.
And you're at 16 going, no, tell me the words that'll get me smooched.
just tell me the password. Tell me the password. Tell me what I gotta do to get to the smooch. Yeah. And by the way, Dave, you're brilliant because this is the perfect metaphor. I can't tell you how to get smooched. I can't tell you the right now. In other words, what's a good superhero name? I don't know. What's a good alien name? I don't know. A good superhero name. There's 1,000 names with Captain this, Captain that. I've got Captain Heroic. Do I think putting Captain before your superhero's name is a good way to go? Not necessarily. It depends on if it fits for you, if it fits for this character.
So can I interpret what you're saying? So this is a very subjective, what's the fire inside of you kind of voice telling you to do. Is that what you're trying to say?
That's what I'm trying to say. I don't know. I don't know that I.
Okay, I 1,000% agree with you. I think we can at least give some passing advice about. I will say this. Because we work in a reductive art, comics are a reductive art, and because space is always an issue, I would advise against incredibly long Greek or Polish names. And you know what I mean? Like Skopolopadopoulos. Like you unfortunately, there's just some languages that have incredibly long names. And you're like, in a reductive art, there's a reason why politicians on the national level always seem to have monosyllabic or duosyllabic names because it's oddly in marketing, it's more powerful. It has a weird marketing resonance of strength. So you'll have like Citizen Kane, like Kane is the strong. Right. You don't see an incredibly long 48-letter name come in.
It wasn't Citizen Kaminsky.
Well, I mean, yes. And on some level, like there's a reason why a lot of politicians, like they tend to be like Bush is a very short name. You know, Trump is a short name.
Right.
And so it's weird that keeps happening. But the last time was like what McKinley, who had a long presidential name.
Oh, that's a good question. Longest presidential name: Grover Cleveland, William Harrison, McKinley.
Oh, Harrison, maybe.
3 syllables might be just about doing it. Off
Three's
the top
about
of my
topping
head.
it out. You almost never see a 4-syllable name, but we all know 4-syllable names exist out there. It's just you don't see them in politics. Anyway, what I'm getting at is it's a reductive art. You tend to see short names like Bruce Wayne, Tony Stark, you're out in 3, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so what I'm getting at is a lot of comics tend to go with shorter, more powerful names, mainly because I think space is such a damn issue for a writer. Yeah. And you don't want to be stuck having to write, the longest name in existence every time they get mentioned.
Yeah.
And then I will say that names have a resonance, and it's a weird thing. It's like an onomatopoeia. Some names just have a magic, a song to them that when you say them out loud or when you read them, they resonate with the character that you're trying to write. And that's what I think partially what Brad's trying to say when he says it's so subjective. It's like the magic of creativity itself.
Right. And think about connotations. Think about what this name evokes when you see it and you hear it, and both of those are important. The look of it and the sound of it. Right. One of my characters' name was Mismatch because she was a fire supervillain, but I didn't name her. There was also that, and also I knew she was going to have a love interest with a superhero. Their relationship was going to be mismatched. Right? They were not a good match for each other. So I thought about connotations of names when I named certain superheroes and certain supervillains. I thought, what does this connotate? What does this evoke? And also think about how the name looks when you're lettering it. I'll give you an example because I've seen this. This person came across my radar, and I started following them on Instagram. And they've got a comic in which one of the characters' name is D something, like Detroit or Denominator, and he shortens it to D. But he doesn't use DEE, he uses DE. Now, that's a really awkward thing to see in a word balloon, especially since a lot of times we use DE as a kind of weird, like a accented word for THE, right? If we say we put D lime in D coconut, for example, right? Or you're using a German accent, right? Right. Bring D Hormitschlitzer over here, right? That's a DE. When I see that DE in a word balloon, it's a stop every time because it's an unfamiliar shape of words, right? You don't see DE. So visually, this person's making a really a decision that's hurting their readability because the visual of that word is tripping up the readers all the time. If you were going to short it, I would say use DEE because that's a familiar visual. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
I do. Yeah. I'm going to speak from my own perspective for a second because I think emotional echoes, like Brad was originally saying, are really helpful in your naming. And so I'll give you 3 examples that I have from Drive, and maybe they'll be helpful, maybe they won't. One of my characters is a very large, heavy-set alien named Nosh, who has a lot of joy, right? He's a joy-filled, he's got an appetite for life.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I went with the word nosh is it might not be immediately representative to you, but nosh is a Yiddish word that means like a snack or a little treat, like you're having a little nosh, right?
Yeah.
And granted, worldwide, there's not a huge amount of Yiddish speakers, but we all kind of have an emotional echo to what the word nosh means. Like it means a little snack, a little treat, right? So you get a sense of what that character is from an emotional echo for that word. Another character that I have is Kuddo. And Kuddo is the way you would say cuddle if you were a baby with a soft palate. So he is a sweetheart. He's all about art and focused and creativity and the gentleness of life. And so his name literally is an emotional echo for cuddle, even though it's Kuddo, right? And then Skitter is a small, somewhat nervous creature who doesn't know where he's from. Well, think of any dog that have you ever seen a Chihuahua, Brad, that doesn't have a coat enough to keep him warm, so he's freezing and he's always kind of shivering, and his little toes haven't been clipped, and he's like tack, 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 across a wooden floor. They skitter across the floor. And that was the emotional echo that I was going with for that character of Skiddo. So I always try to go with emotional echoes of something that might resonate with a reader, even if it doesn't consciously resonate, somewhere on a subconscious level it resonates.
Oh, and another, I mean, there's an onomatopoeia. Let me try that again.
Oh my God. You and the English language are having the most delicious love affair today.
I was trying to make onomatopoeia into an adjective. There was an onomatopoetic.
Maybe onomatopoetic? Poetic? Now you're dragging me down in whatever pit you're in.
I'm just going to rewrite this. I'm going to rewrite the sentence. There's an
Oh my God, I love it.
There's an onomatopoeia effect to all of those words too. In other words, nosh, yes, it's evocative of eating. It's also a sound effect for a very huge character, because when he leans on you, it's a nosh. It's a sound effect. And Skitter.
Right, you're saying literally it's a heavy sound. Yeah. And Skitter is a light tickety sound. Yeah.
It's like squash or bosh or posh. It's a sound. And Skitter is a skitter. That's a sound. There's a sound effect element to all of these as well. And that goes into the mix too. Now, how do you tell somebody how to do that? I don't know. Describe the process of coming up with Nosh's name. You just, if your process was like mine, you just wrote a whole bunch of names down on a piece of paper and started to find something.
I know this because I found the original piece of, when I was putting together my Act 1 for the Drive book, I found the original sketchbook that I had the names, and they were all heavy sounding words like gush, gish, gash, goosh, right? I wanted it to sound heavy. And then I was like, nosh, holy shit, that also resonates with Yiddish, which is great. Yeah. And so I had this perfect marriage of a heavy sounding word that also means a snack. It also means having an appetite for life, that kind of thing. So all of that was great. And it's, the other thing to in terms of onomatopoeia, what's nice about that is think about Stan Lee's naming. Some of his names indicate joy, like Peter Parker. That pops. It literally pops. Peter Parker. Yeah. There's a magic to it, a song to it. Whereas you look at Tony Stark, it is heavier. It is literally Stark. The word literally is in his name. He has a Stark existence, right? He is Stark. And so Stan Lee's a great example of how to grab a name that has, if not a literal meaning, if not an objective meaning, an emotional echo that will resonate with your subconscious, even if your conscious mind doesn't pick up on it.
Yeah. And I can't agree with you more. I don't know that we're giving you anything actionable other than this is a creative decision. This is a decision, and this is a process that's going to be just as sometimes indirect and organic as finding a character design or deciding on a theme for your comic or what kind of comic you're going to write, right? It's an art thing, and it means that you're going to have to go on your own journey and listen for these things for yourself and watch for these things and try it out a few times. Try out this person's name in a word balloon and take a look at it and ask yourself, how's that going to be when it shows up in different situations, different sentences? Is it going to read clearly? Is it going to read cleanly? Or is it going to trip me up? Because like I said in that earlier example, it's an awkward combination of characters that I haven't seen before. That's something that you've got to take into account. And then play off of a type, right? For example, if you've got an alien name, Anything past 1953, alien names always had Y's and Z's in them, right? The unused letters of the alphabet.
Yeah.
And apostrophes. You see people use apostrophes all the time in an alien name because by God, that makes it alien. I'm going to put an apostrophe in there. Like they never met an O'Sullivan in their life, but they're going to put apostrophes in there to make him an alien.
Right, Brad. Well, you know, the apostrophe makes it totally different, you know. Like your lad there, he's got it because he's from a different planet, you know, toe to toe.
And then a Z and a Y and throw in a Q for good effort. And that's all well and good. But remember, somebody's got to look at that in a word balloon and make sense of it.
Right.
So, you know, sometimes it's okay to play against type. All those things that you see that had been done for aliens since 1950, maybe that's okay for then, but maybe you find a little bit different way to do it.
And I will say this. Sometimes, regardless of what conventional wisdom would say, follow your heart.
Yeah.
And here's what I mean. I mispronounced in my own mind the name Hermione through the entire frickin' Harry Potter series. I read that book and I read it. I was like, what the hell is this name? Hermione?
Hermione.
Oh, Harry, Ron, and Hermione walked into the Paul. Harry's turned to Hermione and said, I read it wrong the whole damn time. Because let's be honest about it. None of us had heard the name Hermione before we read that book. But J.K. Rowling was like, no, I want this unique name. And it's important to me that she have the name Hermione. And by God, who are we to judge her? She's now the richest woman in the UK. She's richer than the Queen. So who can do, like, follow your heart. And so
I thought her name was Hermie 1. And there was going to be a Hermie 2 at some point.
But here's part of the magic. It's like what Steve Jobs said. Like, I didn't know what I wanted until I read it. And Hermione needed to have that unique name. If she was Sally or Susie, would it have been interesting? No, not really. Like, Hermione exists now as Hermione in the same way that a penguin named Opus is so uniquely Opus. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's like a unique name sometimes can be it can be a harder leap for the reader, but the payoff can be stronger in the long run.
And on the other hand, if you would have renamed that female lead in Nightmare Before Christmas and called her anything but Sally, it wouldn't have worked, right? I mean, it's not about Sally as a word. It's about Sally as an overall fit in a bigger construct. You know what I mean?
Yes. She needed to be. She
had to be a Sally. If you would have called her Hermione, it wouldn't have worked at all.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So no, how does that get you kissed on the first date? I don't know.
Yeah, and so part of the partial frustration you hear from Brad and I is that this is so specific, and like Brad said at the very beginning of this is the art of art, and it's hard to describe for someone when they ask a very low on the pyramid chain of like how to create a thing. Because this is. First of all, hopefully the spark is already there for you where you know what the mood is that you want to transmit. Yeah. And that's the heavy lifting. Once you know what mood you want that character to have, you can maybe summarize a list of 10 or 20 adjectives that remind you of what this character's outlook on life is going to be or how they act in the world. And then look up synonyms. Just start looking up synonyms and go to town, and you might be able to coin a word or find a parallel word that hits that emotional echo, and maybe that will pay off for you.
And etymology. Not entomology, but etymology, the way a word was produced over years and how it changed. I've been known to look up etymology of words to find roots and other derivations, branches on that tree that I can go to. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do, all of which are fun and all of which are exciting. But I think you need to also, in as much as it's a very specific question, it's also a very general question. And I think you need to find your way on this and find what works for you specifically. That's a big part of this. And the good news is it's a journey. It's an exciting journey. And I think you should be having as much fun with it as possible. If you go into this thing with an idea of, oh no, I don't want to do this wrong. Well, that's not how art is done, right? Sometimes the joy is making a wrong decision and then finding the best thing to do with it, or to find out that it was the best decision after all. Don't go into this whole thing worried that you're going to come up with the wrong thing. go in and find the joy of creativity and let that be your driving force in this whole thing.
Yeah, I think that really is the best thought to take away from this is is a moment where you can claim ownership of the joy of creation. And it does not matter what other people think. If you like the name, then go with the name. Because that works for you, that resonates for you. You are the one that's going to be writing that name out thousands of times in the years to come. So if you have joy in it, if you love it, if it sparks with you, then that's kind of the big litmus test you need on it, and good luck with it.
Well, Dave, on that note, we've been listening to another episode of Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend and the friend of the English language, Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my friend, the wonderful Dave Kellett, co-director of the comics documentary Stripped, and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode like this one. A 5-star review that came in from Aaron Chur says $5 of joy. Listen to this, Dave. A couple months ago, finances were being reassessed due to COVID. Comic Lab didn't make the cut. But luckily, Dave, there's more. It goes on from there.
Hold on. Wouldn't that be an amazing review if it just ended right there? That would be Chef's Kiss perfect. Unfortunately, Comic Labs didn't make the cut. Anyway, have a nice day, everybody.
Luckily, there's more. Aaron goes on to say, last week after listening to the latest episode, I realized the amount of joy and information Brad and Dave provide. So I'm back on Patreon to get the pro tips and access the Discord server. There are 2 places on Patreon that get some time from me each week. One for my daughter and Comic Lab for me. Thank you for what you provide each week.
I got to tell you, that especially coming in the midst of this weird period that we are all going through where all of our finances are having to be reassessed and all of us are having to take stock about what has meaning in our life, I guess is one way of saying it. The fact that Comic Lab has brought you joy, honest to God, means so much to Brad and I, because as much as we're trying to share and pass forward what we have learned and are trying to learn in comics, honestly, as creators, the idea of bringing joy to the world, or to you specifically, that warms my heart to no end. Like that's kind of one of the reasons why we do what we do. So that means the world to me. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And on that note, I'm going to say Comic Lab is made possible by your generous support, yours specifically on patreon.com/comiclab. So we will go ahead and say that like Brad trying to say English. Bagala bagala doodle foo sniff 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 /Comic Lab. Did I ever tell you the one time? So Mattel Toys sent me to Germany to go to a toy festival in Germany. It's one of the biggest ones in the world. And I go to Germany and everyone else, like I was like 27, 28. And everyone else in my group was like 65. And they're like, I'm going to turn in, I'm going to go to bed, I'm going to go back to the hotel. And I was like, come on, we're in Germany. We got to go out and have fun. So I go to a restaurant. And you know, as a Germanic language, English in written, you kind of think that you can understand what you're reading, but you're effing up more than you think you are. Yeah. And so I go to a restaurant, and in very, very, very halting German, I try to order a dish, and I point to it, and I can see the waiter being like, "Are you sure you want this dish?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, this is the one for me. I want to get the meat sampler," thinking that it would be like one sausage, one link, one thing. Brad. Also, because I was 28 and I didn't have a sense of how far the euro went, so I didn't really register that the number was totally wrong for what I thought would have been a sampler plate. I ordered this goddamn dish that was, I'm not kidding, Brad, 8 inches high of just every type of meat. and it was like on a huge ass platter, and there was potatoes all on the bottom. And I said to the waiter in super halted German, I was like, no, I think this is the wrong plate. He goes, no, that's what you ordered. He like switched to English to tell me, look, dumb shit, that's what you ordered. And I had this giant like $100 plate of meat that I had ordered that, honest to God, you lifted it up like, you know when you on Thanksgiving you lift up a turkey and it's one of those platters that has the two handles and you're like, good God, this turkey's heavy, let me bring it over to the table. Yeah. That's what I had. I'm a single 28-year-old guy. I just wanted to go out for a beer and some sausages. I just wanted some bratwurst. And I freaking ordered.
Were you alone?
Yes, I was alone. And so I tried. I'm the dumb shit American in the restaurant, like going to the tables around me like, hey, anyone want some extra meat? And they're like looking at me like, what the hell is wrong with you? No, I don't want any extra meat. And so I'm sitting there. I'm like, well, I got to do my best. I'm like, I'll try to.
You're just sadly eating schnitzel over there.
Just like, well, bratwurst number 28. Here we go. Oh, God, I feel so ill.
I mean, I've heard of asking for a doggy bag, but a St. Bernard?